Welcome, dear listener, to another journey through the gentle corridors of history. Tonight, we invite you to settle into comfort, to let your breathing slow past centuries of change and progress until you find yourself in an age when the Mediterranean Sea was called Mare Nostrum, our sea. Tonight, we will walk the cobblestone streets of ancient Rome, breathe the air of bustling forums, and witness the rise and gentle decline of an empire that shaped the world for over 1,000 years, and deepen as we embark together on a voyage to one of humanity's most enduring civilizations, the Roman Empire. Finally, we will contrast the lives of the empire's elite with those of its common citizens, painting a complete picture of a society both magnificent and deeply human. Close your eyes, if you haven't already, and imagine yourself drifting backward through time, past the noise and rush of our modern world, where the scent of olive oil and wine drifts through the air, and where the weight of history settles around us like a comfortable blanket. The Roman Empire, at its height, stretched from the misty hills of Britain to the sun-baked sands of Egypt, from the Rhine's cold waters to the Euphrates' ancient flow. It was a world of marble temples and wooden shops, of senators and togas and farmers in rough-spun tunics, of gladiators and philosophers, of triumph and quiet resignation. Tonight, we will explore not just the grand sweep of imperial history, but the intimate details of daily life, the rhythm of ordinary people living extraordinary lives in an extraordinary time. Allow yourself to sink deeper into relaxation as we begin our journey. Feel the weight of modern concerns lifting from your shoulders as we step into a world where time moved differently. First, we will immerse ourselves in the daily rhythms of Roman life, the early morning rituals, the bustling markets, the evening meals shared by families whose names have been lost to time, but whose lives echo with universal human experiences. Then we will follow the remarkable journey of Augustus, the first emperor, as he transformed a republic into an empire, shaping the destiny of millions with decisions made in marble halls and torch-lit chambers, where the pace of life was measured by the sun's passage across the sky and the changing of the seasons. Here, in this ancient world, we will find both the familiar and the foreign, the comforting and the contemplative. Our path tonight will take us through 4 distinct chapters of Roman experience. From there, we will explore the mysteries and rich culture of Roman society, their intricate beliefs, their magnificent architectural achievements, and the archaeological treasures that continue to whisper secrets of their civilization. So breathe deeply, let your muscles relax, and prepare to be transported to a world where the echo of sandaled feet on stone streets mingles with the gentle murmur of Latin voices. Daily life immersion, the rhythm of Roman days. Imagine yourself awakening in the dim light of dawn in a Roman home during the height of the empire, perhaps during the reign of Trajan in the early 2nd century. The house around you is quiet, built of stone and timber, with thick walls that keep the interior cool even as the Mediterranean sun begins its daily climb. You lie on a bed that might seem foreign to modern eyes, a wooden frame strung with leather strips, topped with a mattress stuffed with straw or wool, covered in linen sheets that have been woven by skilled hands and softened by countless washings. The first sounds of the day drift through the small, unglazed windows, the gentle lowing of cattle being driven to pasture, the distant call of a rooster, the soft footsteps of servants beginning their daily tasks. Men wore a tunic, a simple garment reaching to the knees, made of linen or wool, often undyed or in muted colors. Married women might wear a palla, a rectangular cloak that could be draped over the head for modesty or protection from the sun. The Romans called it ientaculum, and it typically consisted of bread, perhaps dipped in wine or drizzled with honey, accompanied by olives, cheese, and occasionally eggs. The bread itself was hearty and substantial, made from wheat when available, though the poor might make do with barley or even acorn flour during times of scarcity. The cobblestones beneath your feet are worn smooth by countless sandals, hobnailed boots, and the wheels of carts that carry goods from the far corners of the empire. Shopkeepers roll up the wooden shutters that protected their wares during the night. The baker's shop exhales warm, yeasty aromas as the first loaves emerge from the ovens. The sound of hammering rings from the metalworker's forge, while the potter's wheel spins rhythmically as skilled hands shape clay into vessels that will carry wine, oil, and grain throughout the empire. The streets themselves are narrow, often no more than 12 feet wide, flanked by buildings that rise 3, 4, sometimes 5 stories into the sky. Here, beneath the shadow of temples and basilicas, the business of empire unfolds. These were not merely places for washing, but complex social centers where Romans of all classes gathered to cleanse themselves, exercise, conduct business, and socialize. The air is warm and humid, scented with the oils used for massage and the herbs burned in the furnaces that heat the complex hypocaust system beneath the floors. The process of bathing was elaborate and leisurely, beginning in the tepidarium, a warm room where bathers would lounge and converse, then moving to the caldorium, a hot room where they would sweat and scrape their skin clean with curved bronze instruments called strigils, and finally to the frigidarium for a refreshing cold plunge. Merchants display their wares on wooden tables, silk from China, spices from India, amber from the Baltic, ivory from Africa. The air is thick with the mingled scents of exotic goods and the press of human bodies, while the sound of bargaining voices creates a constant, soothing murmur. The siesta, inherited from the Mediterranean climate, provides relief from the heat of the sun. This is also the time when many Romans might visit the theater or attend gladiatorial games, though these spectacles were held only on special occasions and festival days. The roar of the crowd in the Colosseum, the gasps of spectators watching dramatic performances, the cheers greeting victorious charioteers, these sounds punctuated the rhythm of Roman life, providing both entertainment and a release from the pressures of daily existence. Shops close, the streets empty, and even the most dedicated merchant retires to the cool shadows of his home. This is the hour of the Merides, when the sun stands directly overhead and the wise seek shade. The ground floors house shops and businesses, while the upper floors contain apartments insulae, where much of Rome's population lived. While they could not vote or hold office, they could own property, run businesses, and engage in trade. You might see a woman negotiating the price of purple dye for her textile business, or supervising the delivery of goods to her shop. Their voices, speaking Latin with the distinctive accent of the city, add to the rich tapestry of sounds that fill the morning air. The fabrics were often dyed in rich colors, deep purples from murex shells, brilliant reds from madder root, sunny yellows from saffron. Clients, men of lower social standing, would visit the homes of their patrons, wealthy and influential citizens who provided them with protection, legal assistance, and sometimes food or money. These morning visits were formal affairs, with clients dressed in their cleanest togas, waiting in the patron atrium to pay their respects and receive their daily sportula, a small gift or allowance. Romans divided daylight into 12 hours, regardless of the season, which meant that summer hours were longer than winter ones. The law courts, located in the basilicas around the Forum, fill with the sounds of legal proceedings. Roman law, with its emphasis on precedent and procedure, was a complex system that governed everything from commercial disputes to criminal trials. The advocates, dressed in their finest togas, gesture eloquently as they present their cases, their voices trained to carry across the large, echoing spaces of the basilicas. The first hour began at sunrise, and by the second or third hour, the streets of Rome would be alive with activity. The wealthy adorned themselves with jewelry, gold rings, silver brooches, delicate earrings that caught the light as they moved. Over this, for public appearances, came the toga, that distinctive garment that marked a Roman citizen. The toga was a large semicircle of wool, approximately 18 feet long, which required considerable skill to drape properly. The way it fell, the style of its folds, even the color of its border, all conveyed information about the wearer's status, occupation, and social standing. Roman houses, unlike our own, were designed around courtyards that brought light and air into the interior spaces. The atrium, the central hall of the house, already glows with the soft light filtering down from the opening in the roof, where rainwater collects in a shallow pool called the impluvium. There are no mirrors as we know them, only polished metal surfaces that reflect a wavering image. The Romans valued cleanliness, but their morning routine was far more modest than our own. A quick wash of face and hands, perhaps a rinse of the mouth with water and wine. You rise from your bed, your feet touching the cool mosaic floor, perhaps a simple geometric pattern in black and white tesserae, or if you are wealthy, a more elaborate design depicting dolphins dancing through stylized waves. The morning air carries the scent of wood smoke from the kitchen fires, mixed with the faint aroma of last night's dinner, perhaps roasted fowl seasoned with garum, the fermented fish sauce that Romans favored much as we might use salt. The morning ritual begins with the simplest of ablutions. Water, carried in clay vessels by household slaves, is poured into a bronze basin for washing. Dressing in Roman times was an art of draping and folding. Women's clothing was equally complex, consisting of a stola, a long dress that reached the feet worn over a tunic. Breakfast in a Roman household was a simple affair, quite different from our modern expectations. The rhythm of the Roman day was governed by the sun's passage across the sky. Step outside with me now into the streets of ancient Rome. The morning air fills with the sounds of commerce awakening. The Forum Romanum, the heart of the city, draws citizens like a magnet. Roman women, contrary to what we might expect, were active participants in this daily commerce. The morning is also the time for the salutatio, a distinctly Roman ritual that bound society together through networks of obligation and patronage. As the sun climbs higher, the pace of life quickens. The bathhouses or thermae represent one of the most distinctive aspects of Roman daily life. The sound of water is constant in the bathhouses, the gentle splash of fountains, the whisper of steam rising from heated pools, the echo of voices conversing in the vaulted chambers. Midday brings a pause in the rhythm of Roman life. The afternoon hours see a gradual return to activity. The streets fill once more with the sounds of commerce and conversation. As evening approaches, the character of the city begins to change. The last light of day casts long shadows across the cobblestones, and the air begins to cool. Oil lamps are lit in shops and homes, their flickering flames casting dancing shadows. On the walls, the scent of burning olive oil mingles with the aroma of evening meals being prepared in countless kitchens. The Roman evening meal, called cena, was the most important meal of the day. For the wealthy, it was an elaborate affair that might last several hours, with multiple courses and entertainment. But for most Romans, it was a simpler gathering, perhaps the family reclining on couches around a low table, sharing bread, olives, cheese, and wine diluted with water. The conversation might touch on the day's events, local gossip, or news from the far corners of the empire. As night falls, the streets of Rome begin to empty. Roman cities had no street lighting, and the night belonged to a different class of people, the vigils, the night watchmen who patrolled the streets with torches and buckets of water to fight fires, and the occasional late reveler making his way home from a dinner party, accompanied by slaves, carrying torches to light the way. The sounds of the Roman night are different from our own. No mechanical hum, no electric lights, just the natural sounds of a city settling into sleep. The distant bark of a dog, the cry of an infant, the murmur of voices from a tavern where men gather to drink and play dice. Oil lamps burn low in windows, casting a warm, golden glow that gradually fades as the city surrenders to darkness. This was the rhythm of Roman life. Cadence shaped by the sun's passage, by the seasons, by the eternal human needs for food, shelter, companionship, and purpose. It was a life both harder and simpler than our own, filled with uncertainties we can barely imagine, yet anchored by rituals and traditions that provided stability and meaning. As you settle deeper into comfort, imagine yourself part of this ancient rhythm. Feel the weight of history surrounding you like a gentle blanket, the whisper of countless lives lived and lost, the echo of voices speaking words in a language that shaped the world we know today. The Roman Empire, in all its complexity and contradiction, its grandeur and its humanity, enfolds you in its timeless embrace. Segment 2, The Rise of Augustus, from Republic to Empire. As we transition from the intimate rhythms of daily Roman life, let us now turn our attention to one of history's most pivotal figures, a man whose decisions would shape the destiny of millions and whose legacy would endure for centuries. Allow your mind to drift back to the 1st century before the Common Era, to a time when the Roman Republic stood at a crossroads, when the fate of the Mediterranean world hung in the balance, and when a young man named Gaius Octavius would become Augustus, the first Roman emperor. The story begins not with triumph, but with tragedy. Picture, if you will, the Ides of March in the year 44 BCE. The morning light filters through the columns of Pompey's theater, where the Roman Senate has gathered for what would become one of history's most infamous meetings. The air is thick with tension, though few could have predicted the violence that would unfold. Julius Caesar, the great general and dictator, lies bleeding on the marble floor, victim of 23 stab wounds inflicted by senators who believed they were saving the Republic. The echo of his final breath seems to hang in the air, a moment of silence before the storm that would reshape the ancient world. In the immediate aftermath of Caesar's assassination, Rome trembled on the brink of chaos. The conspirators, led by Brutus and Cassius, had struck down the dictator, but they had no clear plan for what would follow. The city filled with rumors and uncertainty. Citizens whispered in the streets, wondering whether the Republic would be restored or whether civil war would once again tear the Roman world apart. The scent of fear mingled with the familiar aromas of the city bread baking in ovens, incense burning in temples, the earthy smell of the Tiber River flowing through the heart of Rome. It was into this maelstrom that young Gaius Octavius stepped, though he was far from the city when the daggers fell. At just 18 years old, he was in Apollonia, in what is now Albania, pursuing his education and military training. The news of his great-uncle's death reached him like a thunderclap, carried by breathless messengers who had ridden hard from Rome. But with the news of Caesar's death came something even more startling: the revelation that Caesar's will name Octavius as his heir and adopted son. Imagine the weight of that moment, the sudden transformation of a young man's life. One day, Octavius was a promising but relatively obscure member of the Roman nobility, studying rhetoric and military tactics in a quiet provincial town. The next, he was thrust into the center of Roman politics, heir to the name and fortune of the most powerful man in the world. The decision he faced was momentous. He could remain safely in Apollonia, avoiding the dangerous politics of Rome, or he could return to claim his inheritance and step into the turbulent arena of power. Young man who would become Augustus chose to return to Rome, a decision that would change the course of history. His journey back to the capital was filled with uncertainty and danger. The roads were uncertain, controlled by various factions and prone to bandits. The political situation in Rome shifted daily, with different groups vying for power in the vacuum left by Caesar's death. Mark Antony, Caesar's loyal lieutenant, had assumed much of the dictator's authority, while the conspirators sought to restore the traditional republic. When Octavius arrived in Rome, he found a city transformed by grief and fear. The great funeral pyre for Caesar had burned in the Forum, and the people, many of whom had loved the dictator for his generosity and military victories, were angry and restless. The young heir moved carefully through this dangerous landscape, his every step watched by potential allies and enemies alike. He was slight of build, not particularly imposing physically, but those who met him noted the intelligence in his eyes and the careful way he chose his words. The first challenge facing the newly named Gaius Julius Caesar Octavianus, for he had taken Caesar's name upon adoption, was financial. Caesar's will had left substantial gifts to the Roman people, but the funds to fulfill these bequests were not readily available. Mark Antony, who controlled much of Caesar's assets, was reluctant to hand them over to the young heir. This forced Octavian, as he was now known, to sell his own property and even borrow money to honor his adoptive father's promises. A shrewd political move that won him the loyalty of the Roman people. The political landscape of Rome in the aftermath of Caesar's assassination was complex and shifting. The old republican institutions, the Senate, the consuls, the traditional magistrates still existed, but they had been weakened by decades of civil war and strongman rule. Mark Antony sought to position himself as Caesar's political heir, while the conspirators, led by Brutus and Cassius, attempted to restore the Republic to its former glory. Into this delicate balance stepped Octavian, young and seemingly inexperienced, but possessed of a keen political mind and an unshakable determination. The relationship between Octavian and Mark Antony was initially fraught with tension. Antony, a veteran general and politician, viewed the young heir as an upstart, a boy trying to claim a man's inheritance. Their first meetings were cold and formal, conducted in the marble halls of Roman villas, with each man carefully measuring the other's strengths and weaknesses. The air in these rooms was thick with unspoken threats and political calculation, as servants moved quietly in the background, serving wine and delicacies while their masters negotiated the fate of the Roman world. Yet gradually, pragmatism began to overcome personal animosity. Both men recognized that they faced a common enemy in the conspirators who had killed Caesar. Brutus and Cassius had fled Rome and were raising armies in the eastern provinces, preparing to fight for their vision of a restored republic. Faced with this threat, Octavian and Antony found it expedient to work together, joining forces with Marcus Lepidus, another of Caesar's supporters, to form what historians would later call the Second Triumvirate. The formation of the triumvirate was formalized in a meeting on a small island in a river near Bononia, in northern Italy. Picture this scene: 3 men, representing different aspects of Roman power, meeting in the autumn mist of the Po Valley. The island was chosen for its neutrality, a small patch of land surrounded by the gentle flow of water, isolated from the watching eyes of their respective armies. The air was crisp with the approach of winter, and the sound of the river created a constant, soothing backdrop to their negotiations. The agreement they reached would have far-reaching consequences for the Roman world. The 3 men divided the territories of the Republic among themselves, with Octavian receiving Africa, Sardinia, and Sicily, Antony taking Gaul, and Lepidus assigned Spain and Narbonensis. More ominously, they compiled a list of political enemies to be eliminated, men whose only crime was often their wealth or their opposition to the new order. The proscription lists, as they were known, brought terror to Rome as prominent citizens fled the city or met violent ends. The most famous victim of these proscriptions was Cicero, the great orator and defender of the Republic. His death marked the end of an era, the silencing of a voice that had long championed the traditional values of Roman civilization. The manner of his death was particularly brutal. His head and hands were cut off and displayed in the Forum, a grim reminder of the price of opposing the new order. The sight of these grisly trophies shocked even hardened Romans, and the Forum, usually filled with the bustle of commerce and politics, fell silent as citizens hurried past, their eyes averted from the gruesome spectacle. With Rome secured, the triumvirs turned their attention to the conspirators. The decisive confrontation came at the Battle of Philippi, fought in Macedonia in 42 BCE. The battlefield was a plain surrounded by hills, where the armies of the Republic's defenders met the forces of Caesar's avengers. The morning of the battle dawned misty and uncertain, with the sound of armor clanking and horses stamping as thousands of soldiers prepared for what they knew would be a decisive engagement. The battle itself was a confused affair, fought in two separate engagements over the course of several weeks. The clash of bronze and iron, the cries of wounded men, the thunder of cavalry charges, all created a cacophony that would have been heard for miles across the Macedonian countryside. In the end, the forces of the Republic were defeated, and both Brutus and Cassius chose death over capture, bringing to an end the last serious attempt to restore the traditional Roman Republic. Victory at Philippi should have brought stability to the Roman world, but instead it merely set the stage for the final act of the Republic's long death. With their common enemies defeated, the tensions between Octavian and Mark Antony began to resurface. The two men were fundamentally different in temperament and vision. Antony was a soldier's soldier, comfortable in the field, popular with his troops, and drawn to the magnificent Hellenistic culture of the Eastern Mediterranean. Octavian, by contrast, was a politician first, calculating and patient, more at home in the Senate house than on the battlefield. The division of the Roman world between these two men created an uneasy peace that lasted for more than a decade. Antony established himself in the East, where he became increasingly influenced by Egyptian culture and his famous relationship with Cleopatra, the last pharaoh of Egypt. Their palace in Alexandria was a wonder of the ancient world, filled with scholars, artists, and courtiers from across the Mediterranean. The air was perfumed with exotic spices and incense, while the sound of music and philosophical debate filled the marble halls. Meanwhile, Octavian consolidated his power in Rome and the western provinces. He proved to be a masterful politician, gradually building a network of allies and supporters while carefully maintaining the fiction that he was merely restoring the Republic rather than creating a new form of government. His home on the Palatine Hill was modest compared to the palaces of Eastern potentates, but it was from this relatively simple dwelling that he would orchestrate the transformation of the Roman world. The final confrontation between Octavian and Antony came at the Battle of Actium in 31 BC. The battle was fought at sea, off the coast of Greece, where the fate of the Roman world was decided by the clash of warships in the blue waters of the Ionian Sea. The sound of bronze rams tearing through wooden hulls, the cries of sailors and marines, the splash of men and equipment falling into the water, all created a symphony of destruction that would echo through history. Octavian's victory at Actium was not merely a military triumph. It was the end of the Roman Republic and the beginning of the Roman Empire. Antony and Cleopatra fled to Egypt, where they would both choose death over capture. The suicide of Cleopatra, last of the Ptolemaic pharaohs, marked the end of Hellenistic Egypt and the beginning of a new era in which Rome would stand alone as the dominant power in the Mediterranean world. With his enemies defeated and his power secure, Octavian faced the delicate task of reorganizing the Roman state. He could have declared himself dictator, as Caesar had done, but he was too shrewd a politician to make such an obvious grab for power. Instead, he chose a more subtle approach, gradually accumulating various traditional Roman offices and powers while maintaining the outward forms of the Republic. In 27 BCE, in a carefully orchestrated ceremony in the Senate House, Octavian formally restored the Republic, returning his extraordinary powers to the Senate and people of Rome. The senators, many of whom owed their positions to Octavian's favor, responded by granting him the title Augustus, a name that carried religious and quasi-divine connotations. From that moment forward, Gaius Julius Caesar Octavianus became Caesar Augustus, the first Roman emperor, though he would never use that title himself. The transformation of Octavian into Augustus was not merely a change of name. It represented a fundamental shift in the nature of Roman government. The Republic, with its complex system of checks and balances, its annual magistrates, and its traditional procedures, had proven unable to govern an empire that stretched from Britain to the Euphrates. Augustus created a new system, one that combined the efficiency of monarchical rule with the comforting familiarity of republican institutions. The reign of Augustus brought peace to the Roman world after decades of civil war. The Temple of Janus, which was kept open during times of war, was closed for the first time in over 2 centuries. The streets of Rome filled once again with the sounds of commerce and celebration rather than the tramp of soldiers' boots. Citizens could sleep peacefully in their beds, knowing that the armies were on the frontiers, protecting rather than threatening the empire. Augustus proved to be not just a successful politician, but also a visionary ruler. He reorganized the military, creating professional legions stationed on the frontiers rather than citizen armies that might be turned against the state. He established a new system of taxation that was more equitable and efficient than the old republican system. He sponsored great works of public construction, boasting that he had found Rome a city of brick and left it a city of marble. The cultural flowering that occurred during the reign of Augustus was remarkable. This was the age of Virgil, whose Aeneid told the story of Rome's mythical founding and glorified the empire's destiny. It was the time of Ovid, whose Metamorphoses explored the transformation of the classical world. The poet Horace wrote of the simple pleasures of life, while historians like Livy chronicled the heroic deeds of earlier generations. The air in Rome seemed to vibrate with creativity and intellectual energy, as if the peace and prosperity of the Augustan age had unleashed forces that had been suppressed during the violent decades of the Republic's collapse. Yet for all his achievements, Augustus remained a man of simple tastes and modest habits. He lived in a relatively small house on the Palatine Hill, ate simple meals, and dressed in clothes woven by his wife and daughter. He was known for his dry sense of humor and his ability to remember names and faces, skills that served him well in the complex world of Roman politics. His daily routine was methodical and disciplined, beginning with the morning salutatio and ending with quiet evenings spent reading or discussing policy with his advisors. The family life of Augustus was touched by both joy and sorrow. His marriage to Livia was a love match as well as a political alliance, and their partnership would last for more than 50 years. Yet the imperial succession proved to be a source of constant anxiety. Augustus had no sons of his own, and his attempts to designate heirs were repeatedly frustrated by death and scandal. The emperor who had brought peace to the world found that he could not control the fate of his own family. As Augustus aged, he became increasingly concerned with his legacy and the future of the empire he had created. He wrote his own account of his achievements, the Res Gesta, which was inscribed on bronze tablets and displayed throughout the empire. In this document, he carefully catalogued his gifts to the Roman people, his military victories, and his contributions to the peace and prosperity of the Roman world. The tone is measured and factual, befitting a man who had always preferred substance to style. The death of Augustus in 14 CE marked the end of an era. He died peacefully in his bed, surrounded by family and friends, after a reign of 45 years. His last words, according to the historian Suetonius, were a question to those around him. Have I played my part well in the comedy of life? It was a fitting end for a man who had understood that politics was often a matter of performance, of maintaining the right image and saying the right words at the right time. The funeral of Augustus was a magnificent affair, with his body lying in state in the Forum, while millions of Romans filed past to pay their respects. The air was thick with incense and the sound of mourning, as the empire grieved for the man who had given them peace and prosperity. His stepson Tiberius, who would succeed him as emperor, delivered the funeral oration, praising Augustus as the father of his country and the restorer of Roman greatness. As we move deeper into our exploration of the Roman world, let us turn our attention to the mysteries and cultural treasures that continue to fascinate scholars and dreamers alike. From the shadowy depths of underground temples to the sun-drenched ruins of forgotten cities, the Roman Empire left behind a legacy of monuments, artifacts, and enigmas that speak to us across the centuries with whispers of vanished lives and ancient wisdom. Imagine yourself descending into the cool darkness of a Roman mystery cult temple, perhaps one dedicated to Mithras, the Persian god of light who became beloved by Roman soldiers. The steps beneath your feet are worn smooth by countless initiates who have made this same journey into the sacred darkness. The air grows cooler as you descend, carrying with it the scent of damp stone and the lingering traces of incense burned in ceremonies whose exact nature remains lost to time. The walls around you are carved with symbols and scenes that speak of cosmic struggles between light and darkness, of death and rebirth, of secrets that could only be shared among the initiated. Mithraic mysteries represent just one facet of the complex religious landscape of the Roman Empire. While the official state religion honored the traditional gods of Rome, Jupiter, Mars, Venus, and their divine companions, the hearts and minds of ordinary Romans were often drawn to more intimate, personal forms of worship. These mystery religions, imported from the eastern provinces, offered their followers the promise of salvation, eternal life, and direct communion with the divine. The archaeological evidence for these cults creates a fascinating puzzle for modern scholars. Deep beneath the streets of Rome, archaeologists have discovered dozens of Mithraismos, cave-like temples where the faithful gathered to celebrate the mysteries of their god. The largest of these underground sanctuaries could accommodate perhaps 50 people, arranged on stone benches that faced a central altar. The walls were decorated with frescoes depicting Mithras slaying the cosmic bull, an act that was believed to have brought life to the world. The ritual objects found in these temples speak of ceremonies that engaged all the senses. Bronze bells that once rang to mark sacred moments, stone relief carvings that served as focal points for meditation, ceramic vessels that held the wine and honey used in ritual meals. The discovery of these artifacts allows us to reconstruct, however imperfectly, the atmosphere of these ancient worship services, the flickering of oil lamps casting dancing shadows on the walls, the murmur of prayers spoken in Latin mixed with Persian invocations, the taste of sacred bread and wine shared among the faithful. The mystery religions were not the only aspect of Roman culture that remains partially veiled in shadow. The practice of Roman magic, or what the Romans called religio and superstitio, reveals a world where the boundaries between the natural and supernatural were far more permeable than in our modern understanding. Archaeological excavations have uncovered curse tablets, thin sheets of lead inscribed with spells and invocations, rolled up and buried in sacred places or thrown into wells and springs. These curse tablets, or defixiones, provide intimate glimpses into the hopes and fears of ordinary Romans. A merchant might commission a curse against a business rival, asking the gods to bind his hands and feet, his mind and voice, so that he cannot compete in the market. A woman might seek revenge against an unfaithful lover, invoking the powers of the underworld to bring misfortune upon him and his new paramour. The language of these curses is often highly formulaic, suggesting that there were professional practitioners who specialized in crafting these supernatural weapons. The archaeological record also reveals the Roman sophisticated understanding of engineering and architecture, achievements that continue to inspire wonder and admiration. The Pantheon in Rome, with its massive concrete dome, represents the pinnacle of Roman architectural achievement. Standing in its vast interior, you would be struck by the perfect proportions of the space, the way the light enters through the oculus at the dome's apex, creating a column of illumination that moves across the marble floor as the sun passes overhead. The construction of the Pantheon required innovations in concrete technology that would not be matched for more than 1,000 years. The Romans developed a form of concrete that was not only stronger than stone, but also capable of being shaped into complex curves and vaults. The recipe for this concrete has been partially reconstructed by modern archaeologists, who have discovered that the Romans used volcanic ash from Mount Vesuvius as a key ingredient, creating a material that actually grew stronger over time when exposed to seawater. The Roman road system represents another marvel of ancient engineering, a network of highways that connected the farthest corners of the empire to the capital. The construction of these roads required not only technical expertise, but also a sophisticated understanding of logistics and organization. Teams of surveyors would first map the route, using instruments to ensure that the roads followed the most direct path possible. Then came the laborers, soldiers, slaves, and free workers who cleared the land, laid the foundations, and built the carefully layered roadway that would last for centuries. Asterisk, the phrase, "all roads lead to Rome," was more than a metaphor. It was a literal description of a transportation network that facilitated the movement of goods, people, and ideas throughout the empire. A merchant in Gaul could load his wagon with wine and pottery, confident that the roads would carry him safely to markets in Britain or Spain. A message from the emperor in Rome could reach the legions on the Rhine frontier in a matter of days, transmitted by relay riders who changed horses at posting stations spaced along the route. The aqueduct system that supplied water to Roman cities represents another triumph of engineering that continues to inspire admiration. The aqueduct that supplied Rome drew water from springs in the Apennine Mountains, carrying it across valleys and hills through a combination of underground tunnels, raised arches, and covered channels. The engineering precision required to maintain a steady gradient over dozens of miles, ensuring that the water would flow consistently without either stagnating or rushing too quickly, represents a level of technical sophistication that rivals modern achievements. Walking along the ruins of a Roman aqueduct today, you can still hear the whisper of water flowing through the stone channels, a sound that has continued uninterrupted for nearly 2,000 years. The construction of these waterways required not only engineering skill, but also a deep understanding of hydraulics, geology, and mathematics. Roman engineers had to calculate the precise angle of descent, account for the expansion and contraction of materials in different temperatures, and design settling tanks and distribution systems that would ensure clean water reached every neighborhood of the city. The Roman baths, or thermae, represent the culmination of this hydraulic expertise. These vast complexes were not merely places for washing, but sophisticated social centers that combined bathing, exercise, and relaxation in a single architectural marvel. The largest of these establishments, such as the baths of Caracalla in Rome, could accommodate thousands of visitors simultaneously, providing them with hot and cold pools, steam rooms, exercise areas, libraries, and gardens. The hypocaust system that heated these baths was an early form of central heating that circulated hot air through hollow walls and floors. The furnaces, tended by slaves working in sweltering conditions, burned wood and charcoal around the clock, creating the heat that was then distributed throughout the complex by a network of flues and air passages. The result was a bathing experience that was both luxurious and democratically accessible. Emperors and slaves alike could enjoy the benefits of Roman bathing culture. The cultural life of the Roman Empire was enriched by influences from across the Mediterranean world. Greek philosophy, Egyptian religion, Celtic art, Germanic military practices, and Persian mysticism all contributed to a cosmopolitan civilization that was uniquely Romang while remaining open to foreign influences. This cultural synthesis is perhaps best exemplified by Roman art, which combined Greek technical mastery with Roman narrative ambition to create works that were both beautiful and meaningful. Roman portraiture, in particular, reveals a society that valued realism and individual character over idealized beauty. The marble busts that adorned Roman homes and public buildings captured not just the physical appearance of their subjects, but also their personality and social status. The weathered face of an elderly senator, the determined expression of a military commander, the serene beauty of a young woman, all were rendered with a psychological depth that makes these ancient faces seem almost alive. The Roman love of spectacle found its ultimate expression in the amphitheater, where gladiatorial games and wild animal hunts provided entertainment for the masses. The Colosseum, the largest of these venues, could seat over 50,000 spectators, who gathered to witness displays of courage, skill, and brutality that seem almost incomprehensible to modern sensibilities. Yet these events served important social functions, providing a release for popular tensions and demonstrating the power and generosity of the emperor who sponsored them. The gladiators themselves were a complex social phenomenon. Some were slaves or criminals condemned to fight, while others were free men who chose the arena as a path to fame and fortune. The training schools where gladiators learned their deadly skills were highly organized institutions with specialized instructors, medical staff, and carefully regulated diets designed to keep the fighters in peak condition. The archaeological remains of these schools reveal barracks, training grounds, and even a small cemetery where the bodies of those who died in training were buried with simple dignity. The Roman approach to death and burial reveals much about their understanding of life and the afterlife. Roman cemeteries, located outside the city walls in accordance with religious law, were places where the living and the dead remained in close contact. Elaborate tomb monuments lined the roads leading out of the city, bearing inscriptions that proclaimed the achievements and character of the deceased. These epitaphs, ranging from simple statements of name and age to elaborate poems celebrating a life well lived, provide intimate glimpses into Roman values and beliefs. The mystery of Roman concrete has only recently been solved by modern archaeologists and materials scientists. For centuries, scholars wondered how Roman structures like the Pantheon and the Colosseum had survived while medieval buildings crumbled around them. The answer lay in the unique properties of Roman concrete, which was made from volcanic ash. That reacted with lime and seawater to create a material that actually grew stronger over time. This discovery has led to renewed interest in Roman construction techniques and their potential application to modern building projects. The Roman villa culture represents another aspect of Roman civilization that continues to fascinate archaeologists and historians. These country estates, scattered throughout the empire, served as centers of agricultural production, artistic patronage, and intellectual life. The Villa of the Papyri at Herculaneum, buried by the eruption of Mount Vesuvius in 79 CE, has provided remarkable insights into Roman domestic life and culture. The villa's library, containing hundreds of scrolls of Greek and Roman literature, represents one of the most significant archaeological discoveries of the modern era. The preservation of organic materials at sites like Pompeii and Herculaneum has allowed archaeologists to reconstruct the daily life of Romans in extraordinary detail. Loaves of bread, still sitting in bakery ovens after nearly 2,000 years, tell us about Roman diet and food preparation. Graffiti on walls reveal the thoughts and feelings of ordinary people, declarations of love, political slogans, crude jokes, and business advertisements. Garden spaces, identified through the analysis of root casts and pollen samples, show us how Romans integrated nature into their domestic spaces. The Roman understanding of medicine and healing, as revealed through archaeological and textual evidence, was remarkably sophisticated for its time. Roman physicians, many of whom were Greek slaves or freedmen, developed surgical techniques and medical instruments that would not be improved upon for centuries. The remains of Roman hospitals, or valetudinaria, show systematic approaches to patient care that included specialized wards, surgical suites, and facilities for the preparation of medicines. The religious syncretism of the Roman Empire created a complex spiritual landscape that defies simple categorization. Jupiter might be worshipped alongside the Celtic god Taranis, while Venus could be identified with the Syrian goddess Atargatis. This flexibility in religious practice reflected the Roman genius for assimilation and adaptation, allowing them to incorporate useful elements from conquered cultures while maintaining their own distinct identity. The archaeological evidence from Roman frontier sites reveals the complex relationship between Romans and the peoples they encountered at the edges of their empire. Military camps along Hadrian's Wall in northern Britain show evidence of trade and cultural exchange with the unconquered tribes beyond the frontier. Roman artifacts found in Germanic territories suggest that Roman influence extended far beyond the formal boundaries of the empire, carried by merchants, diplomats, and cultural ambassadors. The mystery of Roman purple dye, extracted from murex shells found in the eastern Mediterranean, illustrates the global reach of Roman trade networks. The process of creating this precious dye was closely guarded, requiring thousands of shells to produce just a few ounces of the coloring agent that marked the clothing of emperors and senators. The discovery of murex shell middens at sites throughout the Mediterranean provides evidence of the vast scale of this industry and its importance to Roman concepts of status and luxury. As we contemplate these archaeological treasures and cultural mysteries, we are reminded that the Roman Empire was not simply a political entity, but a living civilization that touched every aspect of human experience. From the profound questions of religion and philosophy to the practical matters of engineering and administration, the Romans created a world that was both familiar and strange, both inspiring and troubling in its complexity and contradictions. Continuing discoveries of Roman archaeology ensure that our understanding of this ancient civilization remains dynamic and evolving. Each new excavation, each carefully analyzed artifact, each deciphered inscription adds another piece to the vast puzzle of Roman life. In the whisper of ancient stones and the echo of vanished voices, we find not only the record of a vanished world, but also the timeless human story of ambition and achievement, of love and loss, of the eternal struggle to create meaning and beauty in the face of mortality. Segment 4. Social contrasts, the elite and the common people. As our journey through the Roman Empire draws toward its gentle conclusion, let us explore the vast social landscape that separated the marble palaces of the powerful from the modest dwellings of ordinary citizens. In this final segment, we will walk through both worlds, observing how the accident of birth, the vagaries of fortune, and the rigid structures of Roman society created lives that were sometimes parallel, sometimes intersecting, but always profoundly different in their daily rhythms and ultimate possibilities. Picture, if you will, the dawn breaking over the Palatine Hill, where the emperor's palace complex spreads across acres of carefully manicured gardens and marble courtyards. The morning light catches the gilded bronze of roof tiles, illuminates the intricate mosaics that cover the floors of reception halls, and filters through the delicate silk curtains that separate the private chambers from the public spaces. Here, in rooms that echo with the whispers of history, the most powerful man in the world begins his day surrounded by luxury that would have seemed impossible to his ancestors. The imperial apartments were designed to impress as much as to comfort. The walls were covered with frescoes depicting mythological scenes and historical triumphs, painted by the finest artists of the age. The floors were inlaid with precious stones and rare marbles, imported from the farthest corners of the empire, green porphyry from Egypt, yellow marble from North Africa, red granite from the quarries of Aswan. The very air seemed to shimmer with refinement, perfumed with exotic incenses and the subtle fragrance of flowers that bloomed in the palace gardens. The emperor's morning routine was a carefully choreographed ritual that reflected both his divine status and his human needs. He would rise early, often before dawn, to review the dispatches that had arrived during the night from governors and military commanders throughout the empire. These reports, written on papyrus scrolls and carried by relay riders across thousands of miles, brought news of everything from barbarian incursions on the frontier to the grain harvest in Egypt. The weight of empire rested on his shoulders, and every decision he made could affect the lives of millions. Contrast this with the awakening of a common citizen in the Subura, the crowded, working-class district of Rome. Here, families lived in narrow apartments stacked 4 or 5 stories high, with no running water above the ground floor and no heating except what could be provided by small charcoal braziers. The morning light, filtered through small windows and the smoke of countless cooking fires, revealed a world where space was precious and privacy was a luxury few could afford. The sounds of the awakening city were different in these 2 worlds. On the Palatine, the emperor might hear the gentle splash of fountain water, the distant calls of exotic birds in the imperial aviaries, and the soft footsteps of servants moving through marble corridors. In the Subura, the morning brought the crying of infants, the calls of vendors beginning their daily rounds, the creak of wooden stairs as hundreds of people began their daily journey to work in the shops and markets of the city. The elite Romans of the senatorial class lived in houses that reflected their status and wealth. A domus, or private house, was built around a central courtyard, with rooms arranged for both privacy and the display of wealth. The atrium, where clients would wait for their morning audience with their patron, was often decorated with portraits of ancestors and trophies of military service. The tablinum, or study, served as the nerve center of the household, where the master would conduct business and receive visitors. These wealthy homes were staffed by dozens of slaves, each with specialized roles that reflected the complex needs of elite Roman life. There were personal slaves who attended to the master's toilette and wardrobe, household slaves who managed the kitchen and cleaning, secretarial slaves who handled correspondence and accounts, and even entertainment slaves who provided music and conversation during dinner parties. The relationship between master and slave was complex, governed by law and custom, but also shaped by personal affection and mutual dependence. The diet of the Roman elite was a testament to the empire's global reach and the owner's sophisticated palate. A wealthy Roman's dinner might feature peacock tongues from Gaul, exotic spices from India, wine from the volcanic slopes of Vesuvius, and delicacies from every corner of the Mediterranean. The presentation of food was an art form, with skilled cooks creating dishes that were as beautiful as they were delicious. Dining rooms were equipped with elaborate mosaics, painted ceilings, and couches arranged around low tables where guests could recline in comfort while slaves served course after course. The common people, by contrast, lived on a diet that was simple but nutritious. The foundation of the Roman diet for ordinary citizens was bread, supplemented by olive oil, wine, and whatever vegetables, legumes, and occasional meat they could afford. The government provided a daily ration of grain to Roman citizens, which could be ground into flour and baked into bread at public ovens. This grain dole, or annona, was a crucial element of Roman social policy, ensuring that even the poorest citizens had access to basic sustenance. The working day, for common Romans, began early and ended late. Shopkeepers would open their establishments at dawn, arranging their wares in the narrow storefronts that lined the city's streets. Craftsmen would begin their work in small workshops, often located on the ground floor of their apartment buildings. The sounds of hammering, sawing, and weaving would create a constant background noise that marked the rhythm of productive life. The smell of wood smoke, hot metal, and drying cloth would mingle with the more pungent odors of the crowded streets. The social rituals of the Roman elite were elaborate and carefully regulated. The morning salutatio, where clients paid respect to their patrons, was followed by business in the forum, perhaps a visit to the baths, and then the elaborate dinner party that was the centerpiece of elite social life. These dinners were not merely meals, but complex social performances where guests competed in wit, displayed their cultural knowledge, and formed the alliances that shaped Roman political life. The entertainment available to the elite was sophisticated and varied. Private libraries contained thousands of scrolls, while educated slaves served as readers and scribes. Wealthy Romans might sponsor readings by famous poets, attend philosophical lectures, or commission works of art for their homes. The gardens of elite houses were designed as peaceful retreats where the pressures of public life could be temporarily forgotten in the contemplation of beauty and nature. For the common people, entertainment was more communal and public. The great spectacles in the Colosseum, the chariot races in the Circus Maximus, and the theatrical performances in the Theater of Pompey were free to all Roman citizens, paid for by the emperor or wealthy magistrates as gifts to the people. These events provided not only entertainment, but also a sense of shared identity and common purpose that transcended the divisions of class and wealth. The religious life of the elite was often more formal and politically motivated than that of common citizens. Wealthy Romans might serve as priests in the official state cults, participating in elaborate ceremonies that reinforced their social status while fulfilling their religious obligations. Their homes contained elaborate shrines to the household gods, decorated with precious materials and tended by specialized slaves. Common Romans, while participating in the official religious festivals, were often more attracted to the mystery, cults, and foreign religions that offered more personal and emotional spiritual experiences. The neighborhood temples and local shrines provided focal points for community life, where people could gather to pray, gossip, and celebrate the turning of the seasons. The education of elite children was extensive and expensive, involving private tutors, often Greek slaves with advanced learning, who taught literature, rhetoric, philosophy, and mathematics. Boys were prepared for careers in law, politics, or the military, while girls received education in household management, music, and the social graces necessary for their roles as wives and mothers. The goal was to produce cultured individuals who could navigate the complex world of elite Roman society with confidence and skill. The children of common citizens received a more basic education, if any at all. Some learned to read and write at small schools run by freedmen, while others were apprenticed to craftsmen or traders to learn practical skills. The divide between rich and poor was nowhere more evident than in the opportunities available to the young, where the accident of birth determined not only material comfort, but also intellectual horizons. The legal system of Rome, while sophisticated and influential, operated differently for different classes of citizens. The wealthy could afford skilled advocates and had access to the higher courts, while the poor might find themselves at the mercy of local magistrates with little recourse for appeal. The punishments for crimes also varied by social class, with citizens enjoying protections that were not available to slaves or foreigners. The health care available to Romans also reflected their social position. The elite had access to the best physicians, often Greek doctors with advanced training, who could provide sophisticated treatments and surgical procedures. They lived in healthier environments, with better nutrition and sanitation, which contributed to longer lifespans and better quality of life. The poor relied on folk remedies, local healers, and the charity of public physicians who provided basic care to those who could not afford. Private treatment thought the mobility between social classes, while possible, was limited and difficult. A slave might earn or purchase freedom and become a successful merchant, but the stigma of servile origin would follow him throughout his life. A successful soldier might rise through the ranks to become a centurion, earning respect and a comfortable retirement, but true aristocratic status remained largely hereditary. The Roman system of patronage created networks of mutual obligation that crossed class lines while reinforcing social hierarchies. A wealthy patron might provide legal protection, financial assistance, and career opportunities to his clients, who in return offered political support, social deference, and various services. These relationships, while unequal, created bonds of loyalty and interdependence that helped maintain social stability. The countryside presented a different picture of Roman social life, where the vast agricultural estates or latifundia were worked by slaves under the supervision of overseers and managers. The owners of these estates might visit occasionally, but their primary residences were in the cities, where they could participate in political and social life. The rural slaves who worked these estates lived in conditions that were often harsh and demanding, though some achieved positions of responsibility and relative comfort as skilled craftsmen or trusted supervisors. The small farmers, who had once formed the backbone of Roman society, found themselves increasingly displaced by these large estates and by the importation of cheap grain from the provinces. Many were forced to sell their land and migrate to the cities, where they swelled the ranks of the urban poor and became dependent on the grain dole for survival. The Roman military offered one of the few reliable paths for social advancement available to common citizens. A successful military career could lead to citizenship for non-Romans, land grants for veterans, and the possibility of advancement through the ranks. The military colonies, or colonia, established throughout the empire provided homes for retired soldiers and helped spread Roman culture and values to the provinces. The women of Rome occupied a unique position in the ancient world, with greater freedom and legal rights than their counterparts in many other civilizations. Elite women could own property, conduct business, and exercise considerable influence within their families and social circles. They attended public events, participated in religious ceremonies, and often served as patrons of the arts and literature. The women of the lower classes had fewer opportunities but greater practical freedom in some respects. They worked in shops and markets, practiced crafts and trades, and contributed significantly to the family income. While their legal rights were limited, their economic importance gave them influence within their households and communities. The slaves of Rome, numbering in the millions, formed a vast underclass that made the luxurious lifestyle of the elite possible. Their experiences varied enormously, from the highly skilled and trusted household slaves who enjoyed comfortable lives and eventual freedom, to the unfortunate souls who labored in the mines and fields under conditions of extreme hardship. The institution of slavery was so fundamental to Roman society that it was rarely questioned, even by those who might otherwise be considered enlightened.